Hello, Theater History 1 folks. I'm coming to you from my mother-in-law's home in my brother-in-law's childhood bedroom here in Atlantic City. And today we're going to finish the lecture on the English Restoration that we began last week. We're going to bump the Italian and French Enlightenment to next week. I think I found a day to do it on. And we'll have just talked about the German Enlightenment, so the timing will be perfect. And this gives us enough time to talk about what really happened in the Restoration, so we're not racing the clock as we usually are in class. So if you recall, we've already established that Charles II comes back in 1660. He is restored to the throne, he being a great patron of the arts, even before he becomes king. And the very first thing that happens is that Charles issues, in the year of his restoration, 2 royal patents for performance. And these go to William Davenant and Thomas Killigrew. And these gentlemen scramble to set up theater companies. The first thing they do, because they are in competition, is they go and they build these sumptuous theaters at Drury Lane and the Covent Gardens, respectively. And these are beautiful new theaters that seat, 2,000 people and have all of the modern day technology at the time. They have systems for creating waves and thunder and lightning and the most up-to-date lighting technologies that they've borrowed from France in the world. These are giant theaters. But they are designed with a thrust so that audiences for the first time are now in intimate proximity to the actors. So I think, as we've already said, the problem with the beginning of the Restoration period is that there's nobody to go see these plays. By and large, the only people who can afford to go see the plays is the aristocracy. And so what happens immediately is that I'm going to have to keep touching the mouse to keep the computer from shutting down on me. So what happens immediately is that the tastes and morals of the aristocratic class are reflected in the early plays being written during the Restoration period. So I think we've said that there are the primary genre, right, that we need to concern ourselves with in the Restoration is that of the Restoration comedy. Now, Restoration comedy is a very large umbrella term, in fact, for a variety of kinds of comedies that are almost impossible really to group together on the basis of their similarity in terms of form, but we do it anyway. And Restoration comedy basically has 2 high watermarks, right? There's a period in the late 1660s and early 1670s, which is the period of the hard Restoration comedies, right? And then there's an ebb, and we'll talk about why. And then comedy returns again, and this time in the 1690s, all of which I think we've said before. And when it returns again in the 1690s, it's really a different form, and these are the soft or sentimental comedies. At the same time, we also have the emergence of what we call the heroic drama, right? The English heroic drama. The heroic drama is really the work of John Dryden. They feature the heroic couplet. They feature strong male characters, but lack all of the sort of bawdiness and licentiousness that you would have found with the hard comedy. And then at the same time that we have the soft comedies emerging, we have the sentimental drama, which we also call the she tragedy. So, owing largely to the ethos of Charles II himself and to the nature of his court, right? Because these are the people going to see the plays. Playwriting is now moving away from a preference for satire, which we see happening in France at the time, but also it had just happened, sort of represented by the work of Ben Jonson, right, in England. Charles II, as we said, loves Volpone, but he loves Volpone not because Volpone is the bad guy, as Jonson intended, but because he sees in Volpone a heroic figure. And so we have the emergence of the Restoration rake. Basically, amoral, licentious men, whereby the main thrust of the plot revolves around intrigue and sexual seduction. As a consequence, Restoration comedies, particularly early Restoration comedies, hard Restoration comedies, tend to be sexually explicit in a way that the English stage has never seen before, and that much of the world has never seen before. They tend to be bawdy. It's a sort of bizarre combination in some ways of court mores and manners, right? These are comedies of manners, right? In combination with sort of a sexual frankness in sort of an incongruous, jarring way. And as a consequence of that, Restoration comedy was really dismissed, and Restoration drama in general, but Restoration comedy in particular was really dismissed by the theater world and by scholars basically until postmodernism happens. Part of the reason this is also true is because, so you have, theater's been out of commission, right, for the period of the interregnum. And so when they get the wheels sort of going again, they're now, all the playwrights are freely borrowing from contemporary French and Spanish dramas, but also they're reaching back into the Elizabethan and Jacobean and Carolinian dramas. They are restaging and freely adapting a lot of Shakespeare's works. They're even going back and stealing plots, threads, and characters from classical antiquity. And it's all sort of thrown together in a strange hodgepodge. When you go to see Restoration comedies, sometimes they don't feel coherent. Well, this sort of mishmash was really celebrated by these aristocratic audiences. They liked the incongruity in a way, again, that sort of echoes what will happen in postmodernism now, 250 years off, interestingly. So let's rewind for a second and talk about how we get here. So Killigrew and Davenant set up the King's Company and the Duke's Company, and these companies are in direct competition for these tiny little audiences. Both the topics of the plays, but also the fashions on display, are up to date on a sort of week-by-week basis rather than a monthly, yearly, or decade basis, right? They are rapidly shifting to try to respond to the small nuances that happen in court so they can draw more business to their theater. So we have the emergence of the hard comedies. We also have the emergence of the heroic drama, right? Which we'll talk about in a second when we talk about the genres. And the companies are doing all right, but because the audiences are so narrow, there isn't enough business to go around, essentially, is what happens. And so the King's Men eventually folds in 1685, and they are absorbed by the Duke's Men, by the Duke's Company. 1685 is an interesting year for England in general, right? Because what happens is Charles II dies in 1685, and we have the ascension of his brother, James II. Now, Charles II had heirs all over the place, but he didn't have any legitimate heirs, right? He had children all over London, but he didn't have any legitimate heirs, and so the throne passes to his brother. His brother is Catholic, right? And this is problematic. Not only is he Catholic, but he's a Francophile. He loves the French, right? And he makes the aristocracy, all of whom are deeply opposed to Catholicism, very nervous. And James is sort of bald about this, right? So what happens is things go merrily along until he has an heir, and suddenly now there's a Catholic heir to the throne. And there is tremendous political pressure and social pressure to get James out and to restore an Anglican. And the theater is responding to this, right, topically. So 1685, we're really in the midst of the comedic wane, right? And the reason is there's an intense political conversation happening in drama at this moment, right? So the Whigs and Tories and their respective playwrights are arguing about what should happen to the throne, whether or not James II should stay or go. These are interesting plays, but they're not particularly good. And even in aristocratic circles, people weren't particularly interested in going to see these plays. And so comedy has really fallen off. So what happens is James II flees England under intense political pressure. And we have the Glorious Revolution, it's called. And the throne passes to William of Orange, right? Cousin to Charles II. He's a Protestant. And his wife, Mary II, right? So William III and Mary II, William and Mary, they reign on the throne. And William, interestingly, spends most of his time on the continent. So the country is largely being ruled by Mary II. So this will coincide in just a couple of years with the arrival of the soft comedy and with the arrival of pathetic drama, which is its tragic counterpart, which we also call she comedy, or we should also call she tragedy, sorry.